possible outcome to the Biden situation is that there is no outcome, that we stay here in the middle somewhere, always wondering if it was just a bad night, or if there is another one, perhaps on September 10th, the second debate, or if there are 100 other ones. And so I have a suggestion for President Biden that will resolve this, and there would be no more questions, and there would be no more debates. And in fact, if he wants to communicate only by written notes, he'd get applause every time he did it. As someone who was worried that President Biden correctly perceived the threat posed by Trump and his fascists and their plan for a form of Nazi Germany in this country, worried about that long before I was worried that he correctly perceived that threat, I have this suggestion. No more talk about Trump or anything else. Just action. Start, Mr. President, by recognizing that this is a terrorist threat posed by Trump and his cult and his allies. Literally declare them terrorists if need be. Or, now that you have been immunized by the Supreme Court, invoke the Insurrection Act, as Trump plans to do. Invoke it. Invoke it for an hour. And arrest and detain people like Trump and the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson, and the head of this bloodthirsty gang in suits called the Federalist Society and creator of Project 2025, Kevin Roberts.
Our side is winning. And so I come full circle in this response and just want to encourage you with some substance that we are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
That was Kevin Roberts. He just promised revolution against the government of the United States. He did it again yesterday at the National Conservatism Conference in Washington. And by the way, if national conservatism sounds like it was meant to invoke that old German party, what was it called? National Socialism? No kidding. Also, national in this use is just a brand name. This is actually an international fascism cartel run by a guy from Israel and starring Viktor Orban of Hungary and the reprehensible British racist Suella Braverman. This Roberts may have phrased his threat of revolution against the government of the United States in a passive-aggressive form, but 18 U.S. Code 2385 is still on the books, and Mr. Roberts just urinated on it and all but dared you, Mr. President, to put him in prison for 20 years, which is what a violation of the statute can cost you. So you have your Attorney General do it by whatever legal means are required to do it. And remember, the Supreme Court said, you, Mr. President, you can do anything you want as long as you can prove it's official. And putting that asshole in jail is as official as anything could be just at the moment. He's called it a revolution, and he has implied that he will make it violent. 18 U.S. Code 2385. And when you are done with Kevin Roberts, Mr. President, go and get this psychopath Mark Robinson, who is A, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of North Carolina, B, the Republican candidate for governor of North Carolina, and C, who is at best trailing the Democrat by 1 point in polling there, and at worst is 4 points ahead of the Democrat. And
get mad at me if you want to. Some folks need killing. It's time for somebody to say it. It's not a matter of vengeance. It's not a matter of being mean or spiteful. It's a matter of necessity. We have wicked people doing wicked things, torturing and murdering and raping. It's time to call out those guys in green and go have them handled. Or those boys in blue and have them go handle it. We need to start handling our business again.
From Lieutenant Governor Robinson there, and Federalist Society President Roberts, this is not the same rhetoric of the fascists from even 3 or 4 months ago. This is overt, violent, criminal, terroristic threat. And Mr. President, if your Attorney General is incapable of finding something to arrest them for, find a new Attorney General. Or arrest the current Attorney General and utilize your national security powers now, not later. Now, not after the election, now, not after somebody gets killed, now. And if Trump objects, Arrest him too. Supreme Court says you can. If you can find him, if nobody has noticed, he hasn't been seen in public since June 28th, hadn't even appeared on video since the 4th of July, didn't make a phone appearance until going on Hannity last night. He's supposed to show up today after an arduous journey of just under 2 hours from Mar-a-Lago to one of his golf courses if he makes it. Arrest him too, Mr. President, since the Supreme Court, which he appointed, says there is no chance anybody in the world can stop you. And do it not just because he and Roberts and Robinson and the Federalist Society and the Nat Cons and the other Nazis represent a clear and present danger to the safety of every person of every political stripe in this country. Don't do it just for that. Do it also because, since the night of the start of the debate, the only thing I have heard you say, Mr. President, that filled me with dread was not any mumble or stumble or inaccuracy or imperceptibility or confusion. But what filled me with dread was when you said what you said after Stephanopoulos asked how you would feel if you lost, and you said as long as you felt you had done your best, that's what it was all about. No. I don't want to hear about your best. I don't want to hear about the chance that your best will be insufficient. If you are allowing for the chance that your best, Mr. President, will be insufficient, get somebody else in the goddamn chair. If you say, as you reportedly did privately to donors yesterday, we're done talking about the debate, it's time to put Trump in the bullseye, let's do it. I want to hear you say that Trump and the fascists will not win. That you will not let it happen. No matter what. Period. Enough talk. Enough I beat him before and I'll beat him again. Enough the elites are trying to keep me out. Enough polls. Start defeating them today. The nation is under threat as surely as if there were armies at the border. You are going to stop Trump? You are going to put him in the bullseye. Do it now. Arrest Mark Robinson, then arrest Kevin Roberts. And I guarantee you, if you take only those 2 steps, you won't even need to act against Trump or any of the other leaders or any of the psychopaths out there who support him. They will all flee. This election is existential for the future freedom of everybody in this country and potentially for the survival of everybody in the world. But it only has to be existential, Mr. President, if you do not now use the defenses provided to you as Commander-in-Chief and by this asinine, amoral, but ultimately unimaginative Trump Supreme Court on whom it never dawned you might use the weapons they tried to give to him. They have immunized you. Now you can immunize all of the rest of us from Trump's mortal threat to the United States of America. Enough. I regret to share with you that I do not expect that President Biden will do any of this. I'm sure if he heard what I'm suggesting, he might recoil from it, not realizing that the one time this nation truly faced an internal threat akin to that posed now by Trump, President Lincoln did exactly these things to the insurrectionist scum of the Confederacy. The history books, in fact, might have judged him far more harshly, but there seems little doubt that if he had been able to round up the Confederate leaders, from Jefferson Davis to Robert E. Lee, and all the others, and imprison them in May 1861, the Civil War would have been a lot shorter, and the death count a lot lower. And I do not believe anybody ever got to ask him, but I get the feeling that if you had said to Abraham Lincoln, in retrospect, should you have simply jailed Davis and Lee and Bedford Forrest and all the others, he would have said yes. I mean, this was the president who ultimately resorted to ignoring the Supreme Court and contemplating the arrest of the Chief Justice of the United States. I mean, Mr. President, if you want to change the topic from the debate, change it. Change it from talk to action. And change the election from the sum of all fears to Biden versus the last leader of the Republican Party who is not incommunicado somewhere in a brig. That would be, checks notes. Oh, here it is. The election between you, sir, and Republican candidate Asa Hutchinson. As I said at the start of this episode, the worst option facing Joe Biden and this nation is staying where we are right now. Leading congressman calling for him to leave the ticket. The Congressional Black Caucus calling for him to stay on the ticket. Chuck Schumer voicing support. The Washington Post anonymously quoting 2 Democratic senators who say the consensus among Democratic senators is that he needs to step down. Mark Warner scheduling an urgent meeting among Democratic senators and then deciding it's not that urgent, can wait till today, and then issuing a statement backing away from Mark Warner. I believe it is incumbent upon the president to more aggressively make his case to the American people. That's not exactly in the name of God, go. The president's people uniformly insisting they have nothing to hide and have hidden nothing, while the White House visitors logs show one Parkinson's expert visited 8 times between last July and this March. The bigger story, confusing that even more, being that Parkinson's expert has been a White House regular and a consultant since 2012. The vice president behaving in an exemplary manner, while there is at least one Biden veteran quoted anonymously from inside the White House in the New York Times, trying to get him out and her in. The president trying to prove he is cogent and clear-minded by phoning in to Joe Scarborough, as if Joe Scarborough were cogent or clear-minded and not an opportunistic leech who has taken every side of every issue just since 2016. When the man wrote "The center cannot hold," this is what he meant. The problem ultimately is this. Even if the president will not withdraw from the ticket, and those urging him to suddenly all relax on the subject, if the New York Times suddenly realizes that it could, flood the opinion and reporting space against Trump in exactly the same way it has against Biden for the last week and a half, if other events we haven't experienced yet crowd the issue off the page, if he has a good week or a good month, or they say, hell, what do we need Scarborough for? We'll just put the president on every morning on MSNBC. Even if all that happens, what makes anybody think that this will neutralize this issue? Even if every Democrat and liberal and pro-democracy person in this country woke up tomorrow committed to never mentioning this again, what will stop Trump from doing so? His campaign announced a $61 million ad buy last night surrounding the Olympics. Guess what that's going to be about? Are there not ultimately, no matter what else happens, 2 questions that cannot be erased? 1, do you want him on the debate stage on September 10th? And 2, do you think, not that he is going to hold steady in terms of his mental alacrity, but that it and the perception of it and of him, that these things will improve between here and Election Day? Because to beat Trump, the perception of Joe Biden is going to have to improve. The thing is, the consensus on this story seemed to be that the dams would all break yesterday. They did not. There were leaks from the congressional conference call Sunday. Jerry Nadler, Adam Smith, 2 others, get out. The Warner Senate meeting, postponed. The president railed against the elites trying to get him out, blamed the millionaires, said rank-and-file Democrats want him in, but reality to this point appears to be the exact opposite. It's now 46% of Democratic voters who want him to drop out. It was 36%. The other headlines, one of the marquee names from the Democrats have a deep bench crowd just withdrew her candidacy for a job that is not yet open. Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan said if Biden drops out, she would not seek to replace him on the ticket. Also, the White House leaked yesterday that besides his letter to all of them, Biden has personally called 20 Democratic members of the House since the debate, which sounds impressive. except that's less than 2 a day. This is a head-scratcher. The president says the 2020 polls underestimated him, so why should we pay attention to the polls now, except they didn't? He was up by 9 points this month in 2020, and he was never less than 4 points ahead of Trump. As CNN pointed out, he is the first Democrat to trail in the national polls in July since Al Gore. It is possible that he meant the polls in the primaries in 2020. But if anything is obviously bothering the president, it is this exact thing, lack of specificity. Trump has been like this since about 1966. But Joe Biden is becoming like this. Primary polls, presidential race polls, they just become polls. And one with this assumes that the listener knows which one I meant. This is not fatal, nor necessarily an indicator of anything. Hell, I do it in conversation on rare occasion. Well, on occasion. Okay, every day. But it leads to statements that seem like lies. There also have been some pleasant surprises in polls, particularly in battleground polls. Best numbers yet overall. And in Michigan and in Wisconsin, and the forest not seen for the trees in this, is he's still losing in 5 of the 7 consensus battleground states. There are advantages to a crisis like this. As Trump long ago proved, stories that would ordinarily be disqualifying scandals go by almost unnoticed. The Biden campaign arranged 2 quick interviews with obscure local radio stations to prove he could do them and supplied the interviewers with questions. One of the interviewers said, "They gave me the exact questions to ask. There was no back and forth." The other interviewer is no longer with her station, and I'm hoping whoever dreamed this up is no longer with the Biden campaign. It is a Trump trick. It is deeply offensive, and most importantly, who on God's green earth thought it would not come out? The stupid people are supposed to be running the Trump campaign. One other headline shows that no matter how grave or unprecedented the news may be, there are always people who can come up with something so stupid that it becomes laugh-out-loud funny. First of all, no. If Biden withdraws, you do not want a mini primary or some sort of huge debate. The vice president becomes the nominee, even if you have to blackmail everybody else mentioned for the job to pretend they've all come to this unanimous decision. Even, may I say this, if the president has to resign or step aside under the 25th Amendment in a leave of absence and make her acting president. Because if the vice president doesn't become the nominee and you have a mini primary, guess what? You will automatically have 5 or 6 or 7 losers. And they will be disappointed. And more importantly, their supporters who cannot grasp that their candidate is not more important than the future of the country will all be disappointed and maybe even disaffected. And this doesn't even address the fact that you would be bypassing the vice president of the United States. Just as importantly, to create an ad hoc nominating system, you open the door to crackpot ideas. Semaphore News reported that a former Obama and Clinton staffer and a Democratic donor have a plan, and they wrote a memo. Biden and Vice President Harris, according to their plan, would announce the Blitz primary. 1 month. Voting by the convention delegates. A pledge of a positive-only campaign or you can't run. A ranked choice vote before the convention, the winner of which is announced on day 3 of the convention, with the nominee unveiled on stage by Biden, Bill Clinton, and Obama. Presumably the nominee standing there with a bag over his or her head, and you just pull it off, you go, woohoo! The memo insists the nation would be captivated by the Blitz primary, and donations to the Democratic coffers would flow like water. And Biden would be compared to George Washington retiring for the good of his country. And best of all, there would be live, weekly Blitz primary candidate forums, one with each candidate, moderated by Michelle Obama and Oprah Winfrey and Taylor Swift. And you know why they chose the name the Blitz primary? Because you would have to have been blitzed to have dreamed this crap up. Also of interest here, yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene is the dumbest woman on the planet, but what's special is just when you think you know how dumb, it turns out she has new, previously undiscovered supplies of dumbness. Marge explains how Paul Revere signed the Declaration of Independence. Not the Raiders, just Paul Revere. She lists 8 signers of the Declaration of Independence, and 6 of them didn't sign. And there's one true silver lining to all this. It gives me a chance to really go out there and attack the morons on the left, and God knows we have them too. And God knows some of them are in the Biden campaign. Because apart from that whole idea about writing the interviews for the radio reporters, they are soliciting applications for a key campaign job right now. And you will not believe what the job is. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown. I have told it before, but it seems like it is the absolutely correct time to tell it again. And if normally you hit stop after Worst Persons in the World, you may want to stick around for things I promised not to tell. As I recount again, the day I was taken to lunch and asked for advice on public speaking, especially on how to sound righteously indignant instead of crazy, by a then senator named Joe Biden. But first, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's Worst Persons in the World. The bronze worst Maureen Dowd of the New York Times. Why, yes, Maureen Dowd still is with the New York Times. And she's finally done it. She has finally written the column we have always wanted to read from her. Not her retirement column. That still looms on the horizon like, I don't know, the promise of eternal life. No, this is a column by Maureen Dowd about the incompetence of Maureen Dowd. Let me quote a paragraph or two. In my Saturday column, I quoted Biden's line to ABC's George Stephanopoulos about how he would feel if Trump were sworn in as president because he refused to step aside. I'll feel as long as I gave it my all and did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is about. Now, goodest isn't a word, but my researcher, Andrew Trunsky, and I listened to the video, our ears up against the computer 10 times, and that's what it sounded like. Unquote. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Firstly, Maureen Dowd actually has written a column about writing her previous column. This goes on for paragraph after paragraph about how the White House asked her, harassed her, interfered with her to make the correction after she misquoted President Biden. I mean, he mumbled through the answer, and maybe you do need to listen to it a second time to be sure, but he obviously says, I did as good a job as I know I can do. The issue of how clear he was is the whole point of this. That's the story. Also, I have mentioned previously that this answer is the only thing he's done that's really terrified me, because the correct answer is, I will let Trump take power only over my dead body, or his dead body, or something similar. But that's not what Dowd is complaining about. She heard goodest, and her researcher heard goodest, so it was goodest, and damn you all to hell for correcting her, White House. Which brings me to point number 2. She has a research assistant? Maureen Dowd has a research assistant, and the columns still suck that much derriere? Seriously? It takes 2 of you to produce this dreck? Thirdly, quote, my researcher and I listened to the video, our ears up against the computer 10 times. So you have a researcher, but you don't have headphones. I mean, I'm not even asking that you and your researcher both have headphones. Just maybe a shared pair of headphones, perhaps? Or he has one? Am I being too demanding? I mean, has the Times been lying about its fulsome profits? Can the Times not afford a pair of headphones for Maureen Dowd? Or some Beats? Or Buds? Are you guys spending too much money sending me email after email after email, a dozen a day, trying to get me to start paying to play Wordle again? I'm not going to. I'm Wordled out. Stop it. Save the money. Buy Maureen some cans. We listened to the computer 10 times. Oh, God. The runner-up worser, Marjorie Taylor Barney Rubble. The way to reassure people about Biden is to compare his acuity to hers, Taylor Greene. If somehow you miss this, I'll just read it from Twitter X. The average age of the signers of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, she wrote, was 44 years old, but more than a dozen were 35 or younger. Thomas Jefferson, 33. John Hancock, 39. James Madison, 25. Alexander Hamilton, 21. James Monroe, 18. Aaron Burr, 20. Paul Revere, 41. George Washington, 44. Wait a minute. First of all, Marge says more than a dozen were 35 or younger, and then her list of a dozen or more only has 8 names on it. And of course, out of her list of the dozen signers of the Declaration of Independence, all 8 of them, 6 of them did not sign the Declaration of Independence, like James Monroe, who had just dropped out of college to join the Continental Army, and Alexander Hamilton, who had just dropped out of school to join the Continental Army, and Aaron Burr, who had just quit law school to join the Continental Army. But I will never get over the idea that Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks Paul Revere signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, Paul Whiteman, the jazz band leader of the 30s, would have been a better guess. It's like she asked AI to give her a list of 8 people who were alive in America in 1776, and she was just lucky it didn't pick Andrew Jackson, who in 1776 was 9 years old. Paul Revere signed the Declaration of Independence. Same year he invented Revere-ware saucepans, 1939. Holy crap, is this woman a moron. And she might be the brightest Republican from Georgia. But our winners, the Joe Biden for President 2024 campaign, I know what you're thinking. No, not for that. It is for their new ad or listing in Daybook, which is a website for job postings, mostly political ones, some educational, some nonprofits. This one is next to one from the Democratic Party of Illinois, which is looking to hire a new head of its direct mail campaigns. Rapid Response Communications Manager, Wilmington, Delaware. The Biden for President campaign is seeking an Rapid Response Communications Manager. Well, there's your problem right there. An Rapid Response Communications Manager? To support the Rapid Response Team communications teams in Wilmington, including drafting and sending press materials, maintaining press lists, and other duties as assigned. We're looking for folks with a variety of backgrounds and experience and are dedicated to building a team that looks like America. Doesn't know that it's a Rapid Response Communications Manager. Well, there's Marjorie Taylor Greene. Key responsibilities: draft press materials, including statements, press releases, advisories, and talking points. You bet your ass. Draft briefing memos, presentations, and other internal-facing documents, like the one reading, "Help!" Correspond and coordinate with reporters as appropriate. Hello, Maureen Dowd. Help manage the flow of communications material internally to key stakeholders and externally to surrogates, allies, and press. Well, this would be the thing about setting up that interview with the radio places and the guy doesn't work there anymore when you gave him the questions in advance. Collaborate with communications team, senior staff, and other team members on additional projects as needed. How do you draft a resignation? Track approvals and strategy meetings. Oh, I don't see any approvals. Coordinate with state teams and rapid response bracketing. I don't even know what that is. Hire, supervise, and manage communications department interns. Oh, no. Preferred skills and qualifications: strong written and verbal communication skills, strong interpersonal skills with the ability to work effectively with employees at all levels, ability to organize and manage multiple priorities and deadlines in a detail-oriented manner. Hello, Maureen Dowd. Ability to organize and manage multiple priorities and deadlines in a detail-oriented manner. No, that's my fault. I read that twice. Ability to handle projects with the appropriate level of discretion and confidentiality. This was sort of an afterthought until the last week or so. Ability to work well under pressure with humor and grace. Yeah, I'm sure. A team player that recognizes the importance of working collaboratively. Additional useful skills and qualifications: prior experience on a political campaign. $75,000 to $80,000 a year. So you're telling me you're just hiring somebody to do this now? The Biden campaign, well, hell, I suppose if they're still reconsidering the position of president in the campaign, I guess it's not too late to hire an rapid response director. Today's worst persons. Somebody should have taken this listing down in the world. Early in 2007, my phone rang at MSNBC headquarters in New Jersey. The senator would like to take you to lunch the next time he's in New York. He needs your advice. Would you be willing to do that? It was Joe Biden's press chief. My first reaction was to ask if they had called the wrong number. My next reaction was to make sure this was not some policy question because, as a news anchor and commentator for MSNBC, it did not seem appropriate for me to offer advice to a candidate for his party's presidential nomination. And doesn't that seem quaint now, Sean Hannity? No, I was told. It was more technical, more about communications, less about content. My antique news standards satisfied, I said, sure. And they gave me a couple of dates, and they suggested, given his schedule, the best place for us to eat would be a restaurant in Manhattan. And I laughed, and I said, yeah, that's great. It happens to be about 45 seconds from my apartment. The day and the hour arrived. It was March 27th, 2007. And I made it to the restaurant, and I sat down, and moments later, in came the senator from Delaware. He had that big, welcoming smile and equally big, welcoming handshake that you may have seen from back when candidates could still go greet the people in a crowd. He reminded me that we had met briefly when he was in Los Angeles for the 2000 Democratic Convention, and he happened to be staying in the hotel there in which I lived at the time. Senator Biden then said some nice things about my days in sports, and particularly about the commentaries I had begun to do the previous summer on MSNBC. Those special commentaries, he said, with first a smile, then a whistle. There was then, and there remains now, almost no space between the public Joe Biden of the campaign or the presidency and the guy who talks informally to some knucklehead off the streets, which in this story would be me. There might be a few more swear words. The word malarkey was used during our lunch, and I remember that particularly because, as I told him, I went to grammar school in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, with a kid named Billy Malarkey. He was delighted by that, and he said he assumed we gave the fellow a hard time, and I said, yeah, but not because of the name. None of us third graders knew what malarkey meant. Then why did you give him a hard time? Senator Biden asked. It was the third grade, I deadpanned. Everybody gave everybody a hard time. He liked that answer. But back to the point of the lunch. Your language, he said, in these special comments. Well, people often brought up the language. I used to do things like, telling President Bush to, shut the hell up, because I had to say hell rather than the word I wanted to say. And some of the events of that presidency so infuriated me that I would redden on camera. And I don't redden in a sauna. Once, my high school history teacher, a distinguished and elegant man whose 9 older siblings had been born in Vienna, and who had the courtliness with which that would be implied, mentioned to me the language of the special comments, and I thought, oh boy, here it happens. I'm in for it now. He, Walter Schneller, had told me on the day I graduated that my plans to become a sportscaster were very nice, and he was sure I'd go and do that, but that he was also sure that I would wind up in politics someday, either as a reporter or as a combatant. And I told him, I was flattered, and I will always like you, Mr. Schneller, and you're out of your mind. Mr. Schneller was also the one who years later was put in charge of the school's surprisingly generous fund for bringing in speakers to address the student body. He was very annoyed by the fact that for decades, and he got there in, I believe, 1960, all of the speakers at the Hackley School in Tarrytown, New York, had either looked like, as he put it, Hugh Sidey, the columnist of Time magazine, or they had actually been Hugh Sidey, the columnist for Time magazine. Mr. Schneller began scouring the Northeast for anybody smart who might have a diverse background, and that is how he happened to be driving to the railroad station at Tarrytown, New York, one morning in the year 1991 to meet the train that carried that day's guest speaker at the Hackley School. He was an editor of the Harvard Law Review, and his name was Barack Obama. Anyway, Mr. Schneller and I were talking about the commentaries, and he said, about the language, Keith. And I braced myself and preemptively apologized. No, he said urgently. You missed my point entirely. I'm amazed that your language is so restrained. If I was speaking, I'd have called Mr. Bush a... Whereupon Mr. Schneller made reference to somebody's mother. So, back to lunch. When Senator Biden asked about the language I used, I was wary, but he followed it up by saying that it was kind of why he had asked me to lunch. I watch the commentaries you do. I don't have a choice. Everybody sends me the videos, and my staffers tell me about them. And every time I think the same thing. You express anger, but as close as you come to the line, you never go across it. I say to my staff, folks, is he too angry for you? And they all say, no, just right. So here's my question, and then we can enjoy this great lunch. When I'm passionate about something and I speak on the Senate floor or on the campaign or anywhere else, I get told by my friends and by my enemies, you're too angry. And when I really am angry, they all say, you're really too angry. And here, Joe Biden laughed. Now you go on TV, far larger audience, far longer speeches, and people say, that Olbermann, he's righteously indignant. With a mixture of laughter, astonishment, and curiosity, he said, me? I'm angry. You are righteously indignant. How do you do it? How do you do it, man? Can you tell me? Without thinking, I replied, you've been in the Senate for how long now, Senator? 34 years? He nodded. And you're only just asking this question now? The words were barely out of my mouth when I froze. This wasn't a friend or a colleague or even an athlete who would take the little joking jab I had just thrown. This was a politician. They may have senses of humor, but very few have senses of humor about themselves. In that split second, I was confident Joe Biden would get up and leave. And he was silent for a moment, and then the corners of his mouth turned up, and to my great relief, he burst into laughter. He rocked back into his chair. He slapped the table with a palm. My God, that's funny. More laughter. My God, that's true. Louder laughter. I do not apologize when I say I have loved him ever since. I didn't think I actually would have had much advice for him and was prepared to just go through the lunch having lunch, but as we talked about this topic, he asked me follow-up questions that made me analyze for the first time some of the processes I used unknowingly when writing and reading on television. I had never thought of them before because I had never had lunch with Joe Biden before. I will not bore you with the full results of the dissection of the process or how to turn anger into righteous indignation, if that's really what I was doing. The most valuable conclusion was simply the oldest one in the book. I always wrote late at night while fully angry, and then in the morning, I would take a lot of things out, usually adjectives. Whatever anger was left was only the most intense and the most justifiable. And if you present it 24 hours after you have written it, you will be in control of the anger and not have the anger be in control of you. In short, sleep on it. That was in March 2007. I saw the senator next in August of 2007, a Democratic primary debate officially called the AFL-CIO Candidates Forum, Soldier Field, Chicago, outdoors, 95 degrees, threat of thunderstorms. Obama, Clinton, Biden, Dodd, Richardson, Kucinich, Edwards, and the moderator, me. There are photos of this. Joe Biden and I walking towards each other, hands extended for a greeting. He is literally asking me if I have noticed that he has been trying to turn his anger into righteous indignation. And Senator Biden asking if I thought he had succeeded. They are great photos, largely because my back is to the camera. He did not really succeed in doing this in the debate, though, and he actually came over to me during the commercial and told me what he was going to do, that he didn't think he'd actually gotten the chance to answer a previous question sufficiently, and he was going to go back to it the next time I called on him, and I told him, don't do that. And he did it anyway, and later he let me know he should have listened to me. Since then, I cannot recall him being angry. Not even in those debates with that goddamned madman. The words were harsh, cutting, destructive, fatal. The tone? No. The tone was dismissive, disappointed, slept upon rage. Perfect. A+, no notes. But it occurs to me in all of the analysis of all of the changes in Joe Biden since day one in 1973, nobody touches on this one thing. As late as 2007, he seemed to be, his reputation was as a hothead. When was the last time he was accused of that? I'm not saying I had anything to do with that. But in the years now since January 6th, particularly, it has been a comforting change, and not a change within Joe Biden, but within our presidency. And yet now, 2024 may make President Biden have to change back. Because the comforting Joe Biden is great, and the sardonic Joe Biden is greater, but the one who beat Trump, and the one we need right now, is the Joe Biden of the righteous anger. I've done all the damage I can do here, and now he's going to Joe Scarborough for advice. Thank you for listening. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums, and Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, were arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Larry David, and everything else was pretty much my fault. Well, that's Countdown for this, the 120th day until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,281st day since convicted felon Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. You have this now, Mr. President. Use presidential immunity. Arrest him. Stop him from doing it again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news warrants. Oh, God, I just want a day off. Till the next one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.